Welcome to the Mosaic booth on the show floor of NADA 2024 here in fabulous Las Vegas. I am joined today by my colleagues, Gil Van Over III, founder of GV03 & Associates, now part of Mosaic Compliance Services, and Mosaic's Vice President and General Counsel, Scott Clay. And we are privileged today to have as our interviewer and host, Demetrios Lahiri, longtime industry veteran, and now the founder of your own new gig, ANESTI Financial and Automotive Services.
Yes, sir.
Well, good to have you here, and thank you for serving.
My pleasure. Well, let's just jump right into it. What do you see as some of the pressing trends in automotive compliance today?
Wow, I would probably say the trends are both technological and regulatory. I will pass off to my good friend Scott Clay to talk a little bit about the regulatory scheme.
Well, the big news, as most people in the industry know, is that the FTC issued the CARS rule last month, which would, when it becomes enforceable and is being enforced by the FTC, will require changes to advertising, training, and to contract documents across the board at every dealership in the country. Your NADA filed a petition for review of that rule, so it is currently stayed. And we're going to be surprised if anything happens this year with the CARS rule. But it's a good idea for dealerships to start prepping for that eventuality in case it does become effective. Start strategically looking at what dealers need to do with their advertising, with their training, and with their contract documents.
And on the tech side?
And on the tech side, the CARS rule has a couple of bad things about it, but the intent to help good dealers to be able to market to consumers and not have to worry about the bad apples, the intent was good, it just was overplayed a little bit. From the tech side, you've got all types of systems now in the industry to replace the paper. It's really become a digitized business. Whenever we do audits at a dealership that's still using a Sharpie and a paper Foursquare, we know we're going to find payment packing, for example. There's so many desking systems out there now that are easier to use, more professional for the consumer, and more transparent. That's one example of how technology is helping the business.
Thank you. Curious, can you kind of summarize for those who may not understand or know the CARS rule and what are the impacts to the dealers today for that?
I can start out with that. The CARS rule has four major components. The first component is that there's a list of 16 prohibited misrepresentations. All misrepresentations should be unlawful, right? So why does the FTC need to list out 16 of them? It's because by taking that course and having specific enumerated misrepresentations, if and when the rule becomes enforceable, the FTC can immediately go to court and seek monetary penalties in court against dealers who violate the rule. So the second major component involves required disclosures. The big change there, the biggest one of all that everyone is talking about, is there's a new defined term called the offering price. All references to specific vehicles in advertisements and in response to consumers in dealing with a specific vehicle has to have basically the cash price that the car can be purchased for, only excluding government charges, mandatory government charges. So dealer charges, all kinds of miscellaneous fees, they've got to be rolled into that advertised price now.
Yes.
They're not going to be able to have asterisks and fine print anymore. So that's the biggest change for advertising. The third major component of the rule requires that dealers cannot charge customers for add-ons that do not provide a benefit. What does that mean? There are a few obvious examples in the rule, including selling nitrogen air for tires where the nitrogen level is the same as the regular atmosphere. So there are a few obvious examples that are put into the rule, but selling gap coverage that doesn't provide any actual benefit to the customer, we're not sure how exactly that's going to be interpreted by the FTC if the rule ever becomes enforceable. And the fourth major component is record keeping. If and when the rule becomes enforceable, dealers are going to have to keep their transaction records for 2 years showing that they've complied with the rule, and they will have to keep records showing that they've trained all their people on the car's rule as well.
And you want to delve a little bit into express informed consent and what that's going to mean?
Right. Well, in addition to prohibiting sales of add-ons, which is what the FTC calls voluntary protection products under the rule, that don't provide a benefit, every item sold has to include express informed consent from the customer. There has to be evidence of that. And we're not sure exactly what that's going to mean either, because the way the rule is written, the FTC mainly says what is not express informed consent, including signature or initials from the customer by itself. So what does that mean? We don't know. That's one of the parts of the rule that is universally banned.
If one isn't allowed to have, for instance, optional products on the just price part of things, in other words, putting an etch product or nitrogen or something like that would be violation by the sounds of things. How does the dealer protect themselves, assuming they're not doing that, to demonstrate and keep the records for 2 years? What is a recommendation?
Well, if the add-on, if the etching or other add-on product is not optional, if it's mandatory, it's got to be included in the offering price that's disclosed. There's a whole set of requirements for voluntary products. The dealers are going to have to start having basically separate disclosures for each of those that states that the purchase is not mandatory in order to close the transaction, if that is in fact the case. It shows the cost of the add-on product over the life of the loan, and there has to be the express informed consent as to those products. So they'll want to have all that information in the documents, that it's both explained verbally to the customers and in writing.
Makes sense. So then there'll have to be additional training to the finance and insurance, actual F&I managers, business managers, so that they follow that flow, and then obviously proper documentation. Any specific recommendations on how best to accomplish that?
Well,
that's our bread and butter.
Yes.
Is we are developing training specifically around the requirements of the CARS rule that will be deployed electronically, via the internet, require a test so we can prove that whoever was taking that training actually took it and understood it, passed with a score of 100%, and then we retain those records. We currently retain all training records indefinitely because you never know when you're going to need them. So that part we have covered, but because the rule has been paused, our production of that content has been paused because we don't know what the final form of the rule is going to be. But we are ready to respond at a moment's notice as soon as the FTC or the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals settles the matter.
What type of potential penalties does a dealer face under the proposed rule?
Can I jump on that one? Because the per violation fine is adjusted for inflation. And this particular fine scheme just rolled the odometer last week. And it's approximately $54,000 per violation. What is a violation? If you have 350 cars advertised on your dealership website, each one of those, if the offering price isn't accurate, each one of those is a single violation. $54,000 times 350 is about 19 million bucks. And we believe that as soon as the Federal Trade Commission is allowed to assess those fees, it will. And it's going to make them big to terrify the industry. And a $19 million fine, that would terrify me.
Well, could you touch on the safeguards rule and touch on some of the recent changes of the safeguards rule?
Well, the safeguards rule was revised 2 years ago, and that had significant impact on how dealers do business. And I think most of it is absolutely for the good. The idea that you should encrypt your data, that you should store it in an encrypted fashion, multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection and response, these are all good things. But the FTC wasn't done. In the time since those revisions became enforceable, which was last June, they've added another requirement, and it's self-reporting. If a dealer has a data breach because the data was not encrypted, they're required to self-report to the Federal Trade Commission, we had this breach, this is how bad it was, and that list is publicly available to the customers who might have been impacted,
Wow.
and to their lawyers.
Wow.
So it's clearly a please sue me list
Yes.
that dealers are distraught about, and not without reason. However, if you follow the rule, you're already encrypting your data in transit and at rest. And if you do that and you still have a breach, you're not required to self-report. You have to self-report if you weren't following the rule. But that is a terrible list to be on, because you're saying there was actual damage, we had a breach, and we violated the rule, which is a deceptive trade practice. So it truly is a please sue me list, and I think it's part of the strategy the FTC has for compelling enforcement. I mean, if the FTC can't go after you because of lack of resource, the plaintiffs bar, there are a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers out there that'll do the job for them.
Very good. Well, Gil, obviously you've been in this space for a very long time. Can you talk about the merger between, two great companies, Mosaic and GVO? What was that?
GVO3.
Yeah, GVO3, and kind of
My monogram.
There you go. Some of the professional benefits to all parties and to the clients as a result of the merger.
Well, Jim's company and my company had worked together for a long time on kind of a casual referral basis. Yeah. So if we knew a dealer needed Jim's services, we'd tee on to Jim. If someone of his clients says, "Hey, I need an audit," he sent it to me. He didn't want to do it. I don't blame him. But at this point in time, it makes sense for us to combine both of our competencies into one great company that can provide a cradle-to-grave compliance solution for all the dealers. And it's a great fit. They're a great company. We're a great company. Now we're all a great company.
And one of the other things that the market wants is a single contractor for compliance, rather than a contractor for audit, contract for F&I compliance, contract environmental health and safety, safeguards, and so on. And what we've been able to do by our merger with GVO3 is really round out our portfolio of services such that if a dealer needs policy development, training, safeguards compliance, audit, environmental health and safety, OSHA, AI-enabled training for both sales and compliance. We pretty much cover the waterfront now, and because we're touching so many hot buttons, so many points of compliance, we are able to offer all of those services in a tailored fashion at a very aggressive price. So we think that is where the industry is going, that compliance is consolidating, just like everything else, and we're happy to be part of that trend.
Right. Before, through the referral work, we were able to provide a compliance management system for the dealers. So a compliance management system is basically Compliance 101, and it has 5 components, and they had the training piece that we didn't have. We have the auditing piece that they didn't have. So now we've got all 5 of those components covered. So if a dealer's ever challenged, he or she can bring out the compliance management system model and say, we do all this. And we do it with Mosaic.
Gil, another question. What new ways are available from a technology standpoint to monitor compliance? I heard you talking about AI teaching and things, and I'm interested to hear about that.
Right. Well, that's a great question. We have developed a continuous monitoring software so that we can provide dealers with a point in time update on how their compliance is working. You know, compliance is, with auditing, is kind of like when you have F&I managers come in to classes or you provide training, you get a spike in their production. And over time, if they're not monitored, they can go back down to where they were. So when we do an annual audit, which is an in-depth review of deal jackets, we touch every single piece of paper in the deal file. We do that, but it's a point in time. And they know that we're not coming back for 3 months, 6 months, year, whatever. You know, they tend to forget about us and what they should be doing because we train on what they should be doing. So this software allows us to provide a dealer with the trend analysis by sales manager, by F&I manager, if somebody's failing, if they're falling off the radar of where they should be with compliance. And that's the software that we now have available for our clients.
And the AI component complements that, in that, like Gil was saying, you have a spike of compliance when you know the auditor's coming, and if it's only annual, the continuous monitoring keeps you honest. But there are other things that can be monitored using artificial intelligence. So we have partnered with Anomaly Labs to create a system where we are audio recording every transaction, but what we're doing is we're listening for the right compliant language. I mean, we built a large language model. It's actually fairly complex, but a simple example is, if this is a lease transaction, we do not want to hear the term APR. We do not want to hear anything that says purchase. It's lease. It is lease rate, lease factor. And we can grade the F&I manager on how compliant the presentation was, and we keep the records of that so that we can prove that this guy's getting continuously better. But what dealers really love about this is it also tracks how well does the F&I manager follow the training they received for sales. Because it's the same thing, compliance and sales. You get your training, spike, on the sales side, take the training, we have the training curricula in the large language model, and we're able to track how well the F&I manager follows his training, and because it's generative AI, we can compare the results of a particular transaction with the behaviors of the F&I manager and continuously coach the F&I manager to maximize that return. And it customizes the coaching for this exact person who works the box. And that, both of these things fill a gap in the circle that has existed forever. Is we can do all the training in the world, but unless it's monitored, it's going to fall off. So the software can keep an eye on some of it, the AI can keep an eye on other pieces, and we really think this is, honestly, this is the most transformative development that I've seen in 30 years in this business.
Sounds fantastic. A follow-up question, if in the transaction some other language other than English is being spoken, maybe Spanish or Korean or Arabic, does the AI have a way
yes,
of...
The auto translation is coming along very nicely. Obviously we're launching with English and Spanish will be right behind it. But the capability to translate into something like 47 languages is on the horizon. We're not launching with that, we're not making a timeline prediction, but it's clearly coming.
Fantastic. Sounds like an amazing adaptation and an improvement of what hasn't been available before.
Right.
It hasn't been possible.
Right.
But now it is, and it's kind of exciting.
Wow, fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. For Mosaic Compliance Services and Demetrios Lahiri, live from Las Vegas, thanks for joining us.